If you're a parent struggling with ADHD, life can feel overwhelming. Things can pile up faster than we can manage to deal with them. We're dealing with our kids' extracurricular activities, our own schedule, work duties, and all of those things combined can pile up on our shoulders. And we can become overwhelmed, we become stressed out, and it's easy to feel like we're failing as parents. Well, today we have Maggie Kellar. A psychiatric nurse practitioner who's going to be an ADHD specialist. Today on the show, we're going to have Maggie Kellar, a psychiatric nurse practitioner and an ADHD specialist. I'm not good at reading these things. I've been sitting in front of this mic for a minute. I'm just going to read the script because I'm not good at this. Is that okay with you? Okay. Well, today we're joined by Maggie Kellar, a psychiatric nurse practitioner and ADHD specialist who brings both her personal experience and both her professional experience and her personal experience with ADHD to the conversation. Maggie will guide us through understanding how ADHD impacts your daily life as a parent, offering practical tools to help you manage the chaos, reduce being overwhelmed, and improve your focus. She'll share strategies for creating a more organized and less stressful environment, allowing you to thrive both as a parent and individual, despite the challenges ADHD presents. This is a lot easier when I have a script. I'm Austin Lee, the guy who can't remember my own notes that I wrote. I'm your host of Unrattled, where we learn to shake off our past parenting mistakes so that we can stay engaged with our kids. Because let's be honest, nobody has this job figured out. Let's get to the show. Hey, Maggie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Austin. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too.
I know we started talking beforehand, and I had to stop myself because I was like, oh, this is really good. We just kept going. I was like, well, we should probably hold back.
Let's roll back.
All right. So before we get into it, tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do and how long you've been in this world.
Okay. Well, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner for work. That's what I do. And I've been practicing for about 4 years. To that effect, nothing we talk about today is medical advice or affiliated with an agency of any kind or anything like that. Simply for conversations within that, though, I've been able to deep dive into what psychology framework today has been known as neurodiversity.
Okay.
Right. And so right now we include ADHD, autism, and some other things in that. But in ADHD specifically, which we're talking about today, I've had the opportunity to get some certificates. So I'm a certified ADHD specialist and just kind of trying to...
if you start using really big words, I'm going to be like, explain to this to me like I'm in third grade.
Got it.
Okay.
I'll do my best.
I don't mind. I've gotten to that age where I'm like, listen, I'm from Alabama. I need you to explain things to me like...
Understandable.
Like I'm from Alabama.
Yep.
All right. And personally, can you tell us about your family? Kids?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So personally, I'm married. We have 2 kids. There's 7 and almost 4. Mm-hmm. And I was later in life diagnosed with ADHD. I was 20, I think. 2021.
I was later. I was like I think I was around 30, 29 or 30.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you.
Before it was cool.
Before.
Certainly. And definitely before we knew so much about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it was a completely different outlook on it. I was shocked because when I was told that, I said, wait, I just told you I graduated with honors. What are you talking about?
Oh, okay.
So my perspective of it was, I came here to tell you that I was anxious, and that's how, so I wasn't expecting that result at all.
Oh, wow.
And so I think the idea of it has changed, or the understanding of ADHD has changed a lot over the years.
Well, I wish I had that. My experience was the exact opposite. Like I struggled in school. I love to learn. I love, I wasn't a big reader, but I started listening to podcasts, kind of how I got into this. Mm-hmm. And I would just soak things up. I loved it.
Oh, that's awesome.
And as I got older, I realized I was diagnosed and I was like, oh, I'm not dumb. This just, my brain works differently.
Oh man. How validating is that?
Oh, it was great. It was phenomenal. And actually ended up going back to school and graduating. But I just carried a lot of shame from that.
Absolutely.
Because I had no clue. And then once I understood this, and then not only, started taking medication for it, which was great, but also just understanding like, this is how my brain works.
Right.
And just understood myself better.
Yes.
It completely changed. It completely changed the way I viewed myself.
Sure.
And so I'm super thankful for people like you who because I don't, I don't use it as an excuse like, oh, well, this is how I am. But it helps me understand and say, okay, this is what I struggle with.
Right.
And this is some of the stuff I need to focus on and take some of these tools to just be better.
Definitely. It takes it away from being a character flaw, so
Right.
to speak.
Yeah.
And understanding it from a neurological or neuropsychological standpoint instead.
Yeah.
Like you said, it takes that shame away.
That's freaking awesome. All right. So let's jump straight into it.
Okay.
So give us a clinical definition. What is ADHD?
Okay.
And kind of like, how does it impact how does it impact the parents?
Okay, sure. So kind of loosely based on the DSM, which is the manual we use for diagnosing in a clinical setting. ADHD is a neuropsychological disorder, right? And so what that means is...
I was about to say, can you give me some more
what
detail
this
on
is
that?
telling us, for the most part, most of the time, it has to do with brain development. And the brain actually develops in different ways than maybe a neurotypical brain was. There are always cases where maybe head trauma or other traumas, exposure to toxins on a very rare occasion can lead to the same set of symptoms that create the disorder.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's a neuropsychological disorder. And so it's always with you for the most part. What we find is that we get to, I call it the breaking point or the tipping point, where our compensatory mechanisms we've developed along the way are outweighed by the life stressors or our responsibilities. So so times that we see that, of course, we have very early diagnoses sometimes with usually the really, really hyper kids, right?
Right.
But then as responsibilities grow or as material gets harder, for instance, maybe now the smart kid can't compensate for the fact they're not listening with their intelligence. And so their grades slip,
that makes sense. Yeah.
So we see it at a couple of different points: elementary school, middle school, high school, any big transition really. When you go off to college, when you graduate and get a job, when you start a family. That's a really big one, is when we start a family.
So much stuff to do.
So much stuff to do.
Oh God,
so many moving parts.
I know.
Right?
It's so funny because now I see like my daughter and their friends will come over and be like, oh, I'm so stressed out with everything. I'm like, guys, I'm just letting you know. They're 19 and they're 19, 20 year olds, kind of getting ready for going off to school and whatnot. And I'm just like, it only gets worse.
Right.
It never is. Like, just so you know, it's easy. It's easier now than it will be 5 years from now.
That's great. That's really comforting. And I said neuropsychological, that term does apply, but I think what I was looking for was neurodevelopmental.
So what does that mean?
So meaning like it's with you as your brain is developing.
Oh, okay.
Essentially it's the same thing that I described, but better word to use for it, I suppose.
Okay. Nice.
That makes sense. So ADHD is formerly ADD, which now we
because that's what we grew up with. Like when I was younger, it's like ADD, and then all of a sudden ADHD was the term being used.
Yes.
So are they the same?
ADHD includes ADD. So I think what used to be ADD, now we call it ADHD, predominantly inattentive type.
Gotcha.
And so within that, it's broken into predominantly hyperactive, predominantly inattentive, combined typed, and then there are other nuances outside of that.
So I mean, there's just a spectrum of this stuff.
Huge spectrum of it. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And it looks different in different ages, genders, socioeconomical situations. It looks different all across the board.
How does that affect the socioeconomic? Like, where does that kind of...
So, and how it shows up?
Yeah.
I think, if we think about like recognition has a lot to do with exposure. Exposure a lot of times has to do with education sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Or access to care. So more rural communities, for instance, probably not going to be recognized as much there just because access to care and information might be less.
Oh, wow.
If we're thinking about like support that's available, be it like different therapies, special schools or special school programs, things that might be available to certain groups that aren't others. Yeah, definitely. Oh. And so when we're talking about symptoms, it's a collection of symptoms and nobody has all of them. But for the most part, either the individual is hyperactive in an impulsive way. So they can't stay in their seat when they're supposed to stay in their seat, or they're constantly bouncing their foot or their leg or shaking around, or just extremely like beyond high energy.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's maybe not me.
Yeah. And when we talk about inattentive, that's more like people might think of your daydreamer, right? So you're physically here, mentally you might be somewhere else, right? Just not listening to what's being spoken to, even when it's spoken directly to you.
Yeah.
Being really forgetful. The scatterbrained is a word I hear a lot in the clinic setting. Squirreling is a word that people use a lot.
I say bird.
Bird. Yeah.
Like Doug from Up.
Oh yeah, exactly.
That's 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like a golden retriever sometimes.
Since we're talking about families, I think of the book, You Give a Mouse a Cookie, where the mouse is like, hey, or the boy's like, here's a cookie. And the mouse says, cool, can I have a glass of milk? And then the book goes on where if you give him a glass of milk, he's going to want to wipe his face. And he wipes his face. He'll see his hair needs to be cut. So he's going to trim his whiskers. And then he'll notice he made a mess on the floor. So he'll sweep the whole house. Anyway, it goes in this whole circle.
Yeah, that's how I clean.
Very circumstantial.
That's how I clean.
Same. The mouse, I don't think in the book, based on the illustrations at least, doesn't complete a task either. So I don't know if they did that on purpose, but they did a good job of kind of personifying that.
Yeah. I get that. Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So that's really it for the most part. The hyperactive symptoms, the inattentive symptoms, I say that's really it. That's not really it. But if we're talking about clinical diagnosis, that's what we're looking at. And
so what does this look like? What does this look like with the family? Like, how does it impact the family? As a parent with kids, what does that look like?
So it is rampant through the dynamics of the family, really. So here's the tricky thing is a lot of times people with ADHD, they are not doing things well. Like they're not doing them efficiently or effectively. They're making things work. They're working harder, not smarter.
That makes sense.
And dropping balls. And sometimes we realize it, like when we forget something or we miss an appointment, so on and so forth. But a lot of times we don't realize how poorly we're doing until someone else can point it out to us. And that happens usually first in the setting when you get into the family constellation, right? And there's a spouse who's always there with you to say, hey, why are you being so messy? Hey, why do you forget? You forgot these things again. Hey, and so not in a mean way.
Well, I mean, because if the spouse doesn't understand, if they don't comprehend that this person maybe have this diagnosis, even if they do, it might frustrate them. Absolutely. And so it can create a lot of tension. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've known it to create, like in friends of mine, I know it's created tension before.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I try to step in and I'm like, hey, listen, it's normally the guy. It's been my buddies. I'm like, hey, listen, this is just how his brain works. Like, you need to cut him some slack. I know it's frustrating. It's just, he's doing the best he can. He is literally disadvantaged. He cannot do much better than this.
And that is the most important thing to remember if you are neurotypical with a spouse who has ADHD. At any point in time, they're doing the best they can. Everyone's doing the best they can at any point in time, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
We may not think it's good enough. They may not, but when that's the case, we got to adjust our expectations.
Well, it's easy to see. It's easy from the spouse's perspective to see and be like, all you have to do is this, this, and this. And
exactly.
And so to them, it's very simple.
It is, yes.
But to some of us, that is not as simple as it seems.
Exactly.
Because I know my wife has gotten super frustrated. By the way, honey, you are extremely patient with me, and I thank you for that. But there's been moments that she gets extremely frustrated, and rightfully so, because I get frustrated too. And so it's understandable that she would, but yeah, it's not, that's just how her brain works.
Right.
And I'm super thankful for it because mine does not work that way. And I need her.
Right.
I need her help. I'm like, I need you near me because I need you to help me work like this.
Complementary, right?
Extremely.
Yeah.
Very thankful for that.
That's it. I see that. And this is not, statistical or anything, but just in my practice, I see that a lot where you have a type A, so to speak, and ADHD together. Because a lot of times, we don't have to go down that segue. We're talking about the impact on the family. I think to really understand how it affects the family, we have to understand how it shows up. So the DSM tells us what the observer might see, right?
Okay.
But beyond that, we look at a term called executive function, which is really an umbrella term to talk about the processes, the cognitive processes that our brain goes through in order to make a behavior actionable, so to speak,
right?
Or to make the individual do what they need to do to reach a goal, essentially.
Okay.
So to break that down a little bit, so I'll go through each component. The first one is flexible thinking. And so that's when we are able to change our behavior or adapt our way of thinking in response to a change in the environment. So whether it's in response to, oh, no, my kid's vomiting, or in response to your spouse having an opinion that you didn't expect, that now it's changing the course of something that you're doing, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And so having that ability to be flexible, sometimes ADHDers will get labeled as being like really rigid, or they always have to have it their way. And sometimes the way we see that the way we see that showing up.
I run everything through the filter. I'm like, well, I'm not going to let my bonus. Well, I need to let my bonus son hear this because he has said that before. He's like, it's got to be your way. I'm like, maybe, I don't know. You know, I have to take perspective from people around us. But
when I think that's because once we have the idea, it may not be our way. We might have gotten the idea of what our way is from somebody else, right? And we've accepted, okay, this is how it's going to be. But when that changes, our brain is not great at being able to be flexible and adapt to be like, oh, wait, that's not how it's going to be. Exactly.
Yeah.
The pivot is not wonderful.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you'll see parents, for example, getting really upset when plans change, or maybe not upset like you're yelling and screaming, but bothered and flustered, right?
Yeah.
Or having a hard time just kind of going with the flow or being spontaneous, like over planning, for example.
Yeah. I mean, what's crazy is sometimes I can be very flexible and very go with the flow. And then sometimes like the smallest thing is just like, no compromise.
Yeah. Okay. So component number 2, working memory. So that is our brain's ability to hold information in our brain while we're completing a task. So to date myself a little bit, like remembering a phone number, right? So you might be like 123-222-5555. That's easy to remember. That's a bad example, but
I get what you're saying.
Context being, you might be like 123. What was the rest of it? Tell me again. Or, just if you're working on something, having to have the information there to reference, right? Instead of
all the time, I'll ask for a number. I'll ask for, like when I'm like in a business context, I'll be talking to somebody. I'm like, oh, well, give me that number, and they'll give it to me, and I'll, okay. And then I'm like, oh, one more time just before we get off the phone. And I'm like, all right. And I'll start talking. And then I'm like, I'll get off the phone and be like, I completely forgot the number.
Right. This is the one that I annoy myself the most with is when prescribing, I'll ask, okay, what pharmacy do you use? And then I'll go and start clicking and getting everything set. And I'm like, okay, tell me one more time what pharmacy you use. And it's within a matter of, a minute or less.
Right.
Holding that information is just difficult.
Not a strong suit.
That's for sure.
I've got to say this. There's a TikTok going on right now. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like, it'll be like a girl on their phone and they're scrolling and they're laughing at like a meme or something. And then they'll move and realize that like her boyfriend got ran over by a car, and she's like, oh crap, I need to be calling the ambulance right now.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that hit for me. Cause I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be calling the ambulance.
Oh, wait, there's something. Right. But she picked up her phone to do something else and got distracted by the meme. I'm with you now.
Yeah. So she's like goofing around. Yeah. Sorry, absolutely. I didn't set up that joke very well.
No.
Okay, good deal. All right. So what's the next one?
So the way that might follow or kind of show up, sticky notes, forgetfulness.
Oh, yeah.
So just even the kids at a young age will be like, oh, I'm so forgetful. How many times did you have to run back inside before we actually got in the car? That kind of thing.
And then the thing that sucks about that is like you already feel the shame, but then when people around you, because your kids will just call it like it is.
And they're very honest.
And it can hit, and it can pierce
right
it really
to the core.
And you're like, thanks.
Yeah.
I love you.
Which leads to organization, which is the next one. And it's organization of your thoughts, organization of your physical belongings or your physical things, being able to keep track of things physically and mentally. This is one where I see tons of compensatory mechanisms. So that also might look rigid, so to speak, where someone has a very specific place for things. And if you move it out of that place, you better watch out. But the reason being, throughout their entire life, they were disorganized, always running around, losing stuff, looking for stuff. At some point, suffered a consequence that was bad enough from that now they have their place.
Yes. Yeah, my keys are in a specific place.
Absolutely.
Not right now. They're there, but they're normally hanging up by the door.
Right. I tell you what, the key fob that you can just put in your bag and not have to actually find and get out when you're getting in your car is the greatest thing that ever happened for me.
It really is. I can keep it in my pocket.
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. And a push to start, it's like, they're here somewhere.
Yep.
I know.
Right. Or you can even look at the dash and be like, oh, yep, my phone's in the car.
Yeah, we're good.
Right.
Exactly. Oh, because it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
So task initiation, pretty self-explanatory. The ability to start a task without procrastinating it. So starting it the way you need to, when you need to. Man. So the way this shows up is like rushing around. And that is so stressful. When I start rushing, my kids get stressed out. I know that my family, that is stressful for anyone around anyone who's rushing.
Yeah.
Right?
Getting ready for school. I traumatized my kids. I really did. I think I did. And now they're up genuinely at 5:30 or 6 every day. And I walk in, which my 12-year-old she's not normal. I'm just going to throw that out there in a good way. Let me clarify, because I'll come in from working out at 6 a.m. and she's sitting at the bar at our breakfast bar drinking coffee, reading a book.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like, who are you? Who are you?
She sounds lovely.
She is. She's great. You'd love her.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, planning and prioritizing. This is a big one. It's the ability to think ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't remember the statistics right off the top of my head, but Dr. Russell Barkley, he is the greatest researcher on ADHD. Russell Barkley.
Okay.
Any literature, his lectures are on YouTube. He's written several books that are, textbooks, but then also for the layperson as well. I'll come back to that, like in resources in a little bit. But he pointed out that the ADHD brain, once you're an adult, on average, you might be looking like 3-4 weeks ahead of time, right? Like, and for some big things like the holidays or something, maybe a little bit further away.
Sense.
ADHD is like a third of that, in terms of without effort, how far ahead our brain typically thinks.
Without putting things in place to do that.
Yep. Without very intentionally doing it.
Yep.
So think ahead to set a goal and then to continue to focus on that goal. So the sustained attention towards what you have to do to reach a goal, right? What we see with that is like poor follow through, not sticking with it. We see the ideas that get halfway worked out and then never come to fruition.
Yeah.
And talk about shame. There's a lot of shame that goes along with that too.
Right.
Really. But it's like you have a vision, but you just have absolutely no map of how to get there.
Right.
Right. Like,
yeah,
so
I've felt that before.
Kind of backwards thinking.
In some projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Problems that can come along with that, though, in the family specifically, is when we're talking about behaviors and boundaries, right? Like holding boundaries, you have to be consistent with that.
Yes.
All the time, not just in the beginning. It has to be the same every time. And you let it go one time, well, you might as well start over.
Right.
And probably not try that same one again because it might not stick the second time.
Yeah,
right?
100%. Yeah.
And so when it comes to discipline and boundaries, I think it's really tricky because in that moment, we'll talk about emotional reactivity, but that can be so intense that to think, okay, remember, I'm holding this boundary now. This is how I'm supposed to act here rather than reacting emotionally. That can be tricky too.
Yeah.
And the consistency.
And what's crazy is it seems so easy, like even talking about it.
Yeah.
But then in the midst of it, it's just extremely challenging.
Even planning it. Even planning out what the boundaries or the programs to maintain the boundaries are going to be. Like, you're like, cool, this will be a breeze.
Yeah, got it. This makes perfect sense.
But then you don't have flexible thinking. So when your kid doesn't respond the way you think they're going to, you're like, wait.
That's not what you're supposed to do.
That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like work towards this punch in your punch card. Like, why are
yeah,
or whatever it is that you're doing.
You don't want Shroot Bucks? That's the first thing that popped in my head. The Office.
Yeah.
You don't want Shroot Bucks?
Don't want Shroot Bucks. You're supposed to.
You're supposed to want them.
So see, they're all tied together at the end of the day and they feed off of each other. Self-monitoring. So it kind of talking about what you were just saying with the girl on TikTok who started laughing at memes when she was supposed to call 911.
Yeah.
Like really checking in with yourself and not in like an existential way, but in the moment to be able to say like, oh no, I've been doing this for too long, or I'm going to stop this in 10 minutes and then move on to the next task.
Oh yeah.
And then you look up an hour later and you're like, 2 more minutes is fine. Only 2 more scrolls, right? The self-monitor. Scrolling's a big one for it, for sure. But it also shows up a lot, I find, especially in females, with food. So food is really comforting, right?
Amen.
Gives us a dopamine boost, which is what our ADHD brains need.
Right.
Is dopamine.
That's what we're craving.
And it even gives, some foods will give you like the sensory comfort, right? Using this big muscle in your jaw. It's kind of has this like sensory input.
I never thought about
too.
that, but yes.
Yeah. And so that's when we open the bag of chips. We're like, I'm going to have a few. Well, next thing you look down and it's gone.
Everything's gone.
Right.
You ate all the things.
All the things. Yep.
So that's not the same as like a time management though. What you're talking about right now?
No. Well, I think time management can fall into the category of self-monitoring. Mm-hmm. And like what you're eating is self-monitoring, I guess. But
okay.
So same. Yeah. Different.
Okay. Because I always thought is time management one of them? Like one of the ones you're going to talk about?
Not specifically.
Okay.
But I think it does fall into multiple of the categories.
Right.
Too.
Because I always underestimate how long things are going to take.
Well, that has to do with organization too, because we're thinking about a project. Part of organization or part of a project is like getting all the tools you need together and understanding the sequential steps that you have to take to get from A to B, right?
Right.
And if we're not very good at that and organizing those thoughts, we're definitely going to we're probably underestimate the time we need to complete a task.
Yeah.
You know, I see on TikTok a lot, one of the buzz phrases is ADHD paralysis. So say you wake up and you're like, oh, I have a doctor's appointment at 11. Don't get anything done between when you wake up in 11 almost, because we just question what can we get done? We can't go into a task because we may not finish it by then. Or it gets to be like 10 and you're like, oh, I can do 3 or 4 things before I leave.
100%.
So you rush through and do them and then you're late.
Yes. Yeah.
Per usual. Right.
Yes. 100%. I feel that.
Impulse control, again, goes through all of the things. It goes through with the eating example, with controlling, just making sure that we think about our behaviors and potential consequences of them before we act, which we might be great at doing when we're talking about big behaviors or big decisions because we're adults and we've lived.
Right.
But in the moment, it can be tricky. So the big one you mentioned is emotional control, emotional regulation. We feel things big, whether it's joy, sadness. We tend to feel things really big. And in the moment, it's hard to know, am I responding appropriately? We can look back and know a lot of times. And even admit to ourselves like, oh, that was not what I meant to do.
Yeah.
But I think that we can tend to be more reactive parents to start with until we work on that, right? If we choose to.
Yep.
And that has to do with our brains, with our upbringings, all of that. But we can be a little bit more reactive, you know?
Yeah. And what's so crazy is I've noticed is it's very quick. It's like a pop and then you're done.
Absolutely.
But then in that short time, you've raised your voice and freaked out one of your kids.
The whole vibe changes.
Yeah. And then you're like, hey, we're good now. And they're like, no, we're not. We're not good.
Right.
And, and I was actually telling you older, and I don't mind sharing this with the audience, that now that my kids are at the age where they can verbalize their feelings and so we're sitting and, I'm having to sit through conversations where they're like, hey, were you kind of got upset about this or said something in this tone and you were frustrated, like it hurt my feelings. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I can't be, you can't explain to them like, hey, because I know this about myself. I have to be like, I'm so sorry. And I have to apologize and just sit in that moment with them.
Exactly.
And those are difficult conversations to have.
They are. But I think it's so important to be vulnerable with your kids and say, mommy gets frustrated too. And that's not an excuse, but that's why that happened is because I was frustrated. And you're right. I didn't use the best words I could have used.
Right.
I could have chosen to say it differently, or I could have been more quiet about it or whatever. But I think it's important to show them that we're human too. And that we recognize that's not the way that we want to express the emotion, just to make sure they don't think that's the appropriate way to express it.
Right. Because then they pick it up and they respond the same way. Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. It's really good. Yep. All right. So we talked about all these different things.
We did.
And I've kind of talked about my perspective and kind of how it's affected me. Given all of that, how does it impact the family? How does it impact the kids?
So I think with the kids, that's a loaded question too, because odds are if you have ADHD, biological kids might have it too, right? It's so strongly hereditary, right? But a lot of times what our strengths are in executive functioning might not align with what our kids' strengths are, or our weaknesses might be an area where they're strong and vice versa.
Yeah,
right? And so that's when we might find that they're stressed out because we're rushing around late, right? Or they're upset because we forgot their gym bag or, something that we were taking the responsibility for in that case. It shows up in stress for the parents as well, of course, because when our kids are little, we are their executive function. And as they develop and get older, we start turning things over to them.
Correct.
Right. But especially in the younger years, when we don't have great control over our own executive functioning, and we're responsible for the kids too. It's kind of just like
fire.
It is a dumpster fire, and it's always like smoldering at the best. So
you got to laugh because it's just like you got to laugh to keep from crying because it's it can be overwhelming.
It can
be. And
be.
then the challenges of life in general with the way the economy, we have the stinking election coming up, and that's stressful for everybody. And so there's a lot going on, and then this happens, and it just amplifies everything.
I think that with time and generations, it will continue to get easier in the sense that now, ACAPS, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they recognize that the treatment course for kids with ADHD is CBT first, therapy first, add meds if you need it, plus parental therapy as well. Right.
So the parents in therapy.
Parental behavioral therapy too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So basically to learn how to appropriately interact with your kids, because I saw a meme yesterday and it showed a picture, a very peaceful picture. And it's like disciplining your mild-mannered child. And it's like, I am your mother. You'll listen to me. You know that song?
Yeah.
And the kid was like, okay. But then it's like your ADHD kid comes in and the world's just on fire. They're not going to respond to that same direct discipline.
No.
And it's not because they're defiant necessarily. It's just their wiring is different. They're differently wired.
And you got to figure out how to communicate to them.
Yeah,
and you got to figure out how to settle them down and make them feel safe and all the things.
Exactly.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with, there's nothing wrong with like going and saying like, I need help.
Exactly.
Because I feel like there is a big stigma, especially with the word therapy.
Yes.
Like, cause I can't tell how many times people are like, it's becoming more acceptable. I think a lot more acceptable, but there were times when it was just like, oh, no, like, no,
exactly.
I've seen it a lot in my parents' generation. I think millennials, I'm about to be 39. I know a lot of my friends are in therapy, like, yes, therapy.
Exactly.
But then I know my mom's generation, like my mom's age group, like I brought it up to my dad before he passed. He's like, yeah, I don't do that.
Right. Or maybe in an extreme crisis.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Right. But not for just basic things.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm glad to see that it's shifting.
Me too.
And I'm glad to see people willing to say they need help.
Definitely. And I think that, as that generation of kids come up, they will have come up, hopefully if they were diagnosed, younger at least, starting off with that therapy and with parents who understand their brain and who are at least trying to work with the way that their brain operates. Right. But I think those are the biggest ways it shows up in the family, for the detriment at least, is the stress that it can create. And the dynamics, and the child can only be as healthy and happy as the parent is. On
Unrattled, we always think like the best thing you can do for a family is like be a healthy parent.
Absolutely.
Like go to therapy if that's what you need. Take care of yourself. Like you can't do anything unless you're healthy.
A dysregulated parent cannot regulate a dysregulated child.
Oh, that's good. Say that one more time.
I didn't make that up, I'm sure.
Thank you for your honesty.
I don't know where. I read a lot. A dysregulated parent can't regulate a dysregulated child.
That's really good.
They need, especially when they're younger. And again, we're loaning them our executive function. They need us to co-regulate. Right. While they're learning how to regulate themselves.
Right.
And if we're, up here at a level 10 agitated in the situation, they're going to feed off of that. Right. Rather than our calm.
Agitated or disorganized or
stressed,
whatever that is. Like if you're at a 10, just off the charts, there's no way they're going to be. I mean, they can't. Yeah. And then on top of it, they're never going to see it done right, and they're going to carry that into their future. And it really is. I realized a long time ago, like if I don't address these things, they're going to take it into that's the last thing we want for our kids.
Exactly. There's a really good book that I would recommend. I mean, I think it'd be great for all parents, but especially parents with ADHD, since we do tend to be more reactive just at our baseline without, the intention behind it. And it's called...
You can pull it out and show us.
Okay. So
that's fine too.
You can see my little tabs in it. Raising Good Humans. So Hunter Clark Field's
that's a good book.
Yeah. It's and it talks about, just in the title, Mindful Guide to Breaking the Cycle of Reactive Parenting. Okay. And the way that affects your family is to help them to be kind and confident, rather than the shame and the guilt. Right. So, but it's a really good book that helps to teach kind of emotional regulation for parents and how to try to break that cycle.
Yeah, I'll be picking that up ASAP. And we'll have it in the show notes too.
Yeah. Yeah. It has a workbook too.
Yeah. I'll probably have to get that one too.
I haven't done that one yet, but I plan to read it again and again. So I probably will, but, that can be good. The other resource, I'll just roll with that.
Let's go. Let's talk about resources.
The other resource, my other favorite book for the parents of any ADHD child, or I find it to be helpful, even though it wasn't written for this, parents who have ADHD. It's called Smart But Scattered. And I believe a new edition's about to come out in a couple of months, but they have different books for different age groups. But this is a book that takes you through your executive functions. You're going to rate them and your kids. Then you find like where you oppose and where you're the same. And from that, you can develop interventions to try to make life easier.
So it has like an age specific.
Yeah. So this one's for ages 4 to 13. Then it has like preteens and teenagers. Those might be separate, actually. I think there are 3 different volumes.
I'll have to check it out because that sounds... I want to give my kids... See, I wish I had more stuff like that when I was a kid. Just on how to
Yeah.
Like it seems simple, but I'm just like, I wish I would have had those
Right.
tools to me when I was a kid. And when I see my kids kind of going through that stuff, I'm like, what can I give you
Yeah, absolutely.
to make sure that you don't have to go through the same struggle that I went through?
Absolutely. I think just in the fact that you're thinking about it though, that even if they struggle, the struggle will be less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't take they've got to grow and they've got to stretch. And
Mm-hmm. Then I have tons of resources, but the last one that I brought with me for show and tell today was for the ADHD parents in particular.
I love you called it show and tell, by the way.
Show and tell, thanks. Yeah. Like adult show and tell,
It is,
right?
it is.
Got to bring part of my favorite collection in.
I love it.
This is called the Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi. It's also a great podcast. That's how I found her originally.
Okay.
And so this is basically, it helps with organization, right? And by basically saying, figure out what's important based on your values. The things that don't fall into that category, be lazy about them. Just be sure you're a genius about the things that actually do matter.
Oh, that's really, really good.
Right. So instead of being like, here's how to organize your silverware drawer, she gives you more like loose guidelines on figure out what's important.
Yeah.
And be great at it.
And do that.
And be okay with being okay at the stuff that's not important.
Right. We can put those in the show notes.
Perfect.
Down in the bottom.
Great.
And along with other resources, because you have more, correct?
I do. Yeah. Anything by, like I said, Dr. Russell Barkley. Is brilliant when it comes to understanding ADHD, even though he doesn't have ADHD. His brother does, or did. He deceased. And, but so he understands it very intimately and has done just oodles of research on it. A lot of like the self-rating, symptom rating guides that we use, he's developed some of those. And so he's very present in the clinical setting as well.
All right.
But he has several books written for the partners of ADHD, how to parent your ADHD kid, how to deal with your adult ADHD. I mean, basically any variety.
I need all the books.
They're all on Amazon or wherever else you buy books, I suppose.
Yeah.
But we'll link
where
those
else
too.
do you buy books?
Right.
Barnes and Noble is where my daughter. Yeah. Shout out to all our local bookstores, by the way. Nobody buys on Amazon. We all love our local bookstores. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. I would, like I said, I could have this conversation with you for a long time, and we greatly appreciate you coming on. How can people get in touch with you? If they want to talk or anything, how can they get in touch with you?
So you can reach me at Maggie, Maggie, at Let's Be Mindwell, LETS.
Okay.
BE Mindwell, MINDWELL.com.
Okay.
And if you have questions about ADHD, resources, coaching, I suppose, for parents, if parents need help understanding your kids, kids need help just understanding how their brain works once they're to the developmental age, then I'm here for it. Nice.
Again, Maggie, thank you so much for coming. Great information, great resources. Just talking to you, you said a lot of big words that I don't know, so I know you're extremely smart. No, don't apologize. No, thank you for the work you do. It's massively important. Guys, if it's something you're struggling with, please remember, as parents, none of us have this figured out. We're just like you. We're figuring it out as we go along. But the best thing you can do is to just stay engaged with your kids. And we'll see you here next time on Unrattled. Thanks, guys.